what the spiritual significance of any of this was. What is this plaster idol? It seemed like superstitious. It seemed like superstition to me. Why are they asking me to do this? They asked me to take my textbooks with me on the day of Shabbos, place them at her feet. So now I'm feeling like, what? This seems like a shopkeeping religion. Is this what we ask God for? To do good on an exam? This is pathetic. And so I was very skeptical and critical. I was like a budding philosopher, as you can tell, right? And so all of this cultural Hinduism left me cold and frankly a little disenchanted, and I became an agnostic. Okay, so from my early adult days, high school into college, I'm an agnostic. I would call myself an agnostic spiritual seeker at that point in my life. And at that point, I started studying the different world religious scriptures. And I'm reading the Bible, I'm reading parts of the Quran, I'm reading Dhammapada in Buddhism, I'm reading Bhagavad Gita. That's the first Hindu scripture I read, which really gripped me. And it was just on my own. I just read it in translation. I didn't know Sanskrit at the time. I learned it during my PhD. But before that, I read the translation and it just instantly resonated with me. And it wasn't the bhakti stuff. I was an agnostic. I'm still an agnostic. It appealed to me as an agnostic. Not all the God stuff and Krishna and bhakti and none of that. But Vedanta at its core teaches that you're not the body-mind complex. You suffer because you mistakenly identify with this body-mind complex. And what gripped me is, through renunciation of worldly attachments and desires, you can realize your true spiritual nature as an Atman separate from the body-mind complex, which never dies and which is never even born. So that idea really gripped me. And that's what took me into spiritual life, actually. And so as an agnostic spiritual seeker, I was very academically motivated, and I was at Berkeley, and I spent a year at Oxford University, and I wanted to go into higher studies, and so I was admitted to Princeton, Stanford, Berkeley, and University of Chicago, for these different PhD programs, and I chose to go back to Berkeley, and so I did my master's and PhD there. But I was a spiritual aspirant, but still thinking that at the end of the day, I'll be a professor, an academic. Within months of joining this PhD program, I found that these brilliant, world-class academics, extraordinarily well published, highly respected in their fields, led extraordinarily uninspiring lives. And I said, is this how I want to end up? Is this it? And I said, no, I'm sorry, there's something greater and higher than just intellectual fulfillment. You can be the most brilliant mind, you can be a Nobel Prize winner, and still not be happy, and still not be fulfilled, and be just frankly a terrible person, an egomaniac. It's not uncommon to find that some of the best and brightest minds are some of the worst human beings on this planet, and will torture their students and be egomaniacs. Anyway, I know some of this is hitting close to home. I'm not going to call out anyone by name, but we all have our examples. And so then I thought to myself, I need to rethink things. And I'm still an agnostic. That's what's interesting about this whole journey. And at the same time, I decided more or less at that time, so within one semester of graduate school, this is while I'm still a master's student doing classes, I started telling my friends, even my professors, I said, I'm going to finish my PhD, and then I'm going to move to India, and I'm going to be a monk.
But you told me that from a teenage you have some conviction that you wanted to be a monk, that too in India, that you told me.
Yeah, it's these two things. I just had this feeling. From age 14 or something, I told my parents that I wouldn't marry, and they said, oh, everybody says that. But I really meant it. So I had that conviction very early on, and it started taking shape. But I'm still agnostic. And as an agnostic, a book comes into my hands called Raja Yoga by Swami. And different things started happening and kind of converging. And I read that and I was completely taken by it. And one of the things that I love so much about it, and you can look at, I have a class on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and I start by talking about Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga. If you look at the preface and the introduction, he's speaking to modern, Western-educated, scientific minds. And again he says that spirituality must be verified. Empirical verification is at the bedrock of all spirituality as it is at the bedrock of all sciences. So religion itself needs to be understood as a kind of science, going back to your question about science. You know what I mean? That's what gripped me. as an agnostic, critical thinker, and as a budding philosopher, that's what gripped me. And then I read the life of Swami Vivekananda. This was a biography written by Swami Nikalananda called Swami Vivekananda Biography. And it was incredible, looking at his life. His life puts the lives of these great world-class academics to shame. Because he had a heart as broad as the skies. He would cry for the poor and the destitute and the downtrodden. We're very glib these days because of DEI and wokeism and all that about being good to others. Most of us, that also becomes a source of ego. It's not so easy just to talk about diversity and equity and inclusion, but to really feel it and practice it. That requires tremendous purity and unselfishness, and you can only achieve that through spiritual practice. Not just, otherwise you're just glib. You're just verbally professing these things, but you're not actually feeling it and practicing it from within. So then my ideas about spiritual life became clear after reading the life and teachings of Ramakrishna and Vivekananda. And then the next thing that gripped me was Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. And so my journey is from agnosticism, as kind of agnostic spiritual seeker, to Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, and it blew me away. And I loved the very thing that I was talking about in that early slide. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, this world is a dream. It's an illusion. And I went all the way with it, not like these namby-pamby Advaitins who call themselves Shankarites but still believe in God. And no, not like that. And still practice bhakti, none of that. No, I was a hardcore. So Ajatavadan, in the pure Gaudapada sense of Mandukya Karika, Nanirodho na chotpatti na baddho na cha sadhaka namamukshu navai mukta ityesha paramatata. From the ultimate standpoint, there's no spiritual seeker, there's nobody bound, there's nobody ignorant, there's nobody who is liberated. There's no such thing as liberation, there's no universe, for goodness sakes. There's just non-dual Brahman. And this whole thing is a dream. And there's no dreamer of the dream. It's that radical. Otherwise, that's another kind of duality. So I believe in this. And that's how I joined the order, as a Shankarite. And so I joined the order at Vivekananda University, which is now called RKM Very. It's in Belumat. It's a university run by our monastic order. And I'm a brahmacharin then, a novitiate, and I'm studying Shankara's commentaries and trying to practice Advaita Vedanta, and then a few things happen. Okay, so this is what I call phase 2. Phase 1, agnostic spiritual teacher, agnostic spiritual seeker. Phase 2, I'm a Shankarite, practicing the path of knowledge and none of this bhakti stuff. And then what happens? 3 things converge. Number 1, I'm studying Shankara's commentaries on the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and the Brahma Sutra, and I'm finding on almost every page that whenever he's confronted with scriptural verses that talk about bhakti or about the personal God or about karma yoga, he ends up having to, what Swami Vivekananda calls colorfully, text torturing. He has to force these verses to conform to his own philosophical framework. And he has to say things like, oh, well, when the Upanishad is talking about karma yoga, it's addressing manda adhikaris, inferior spiritual aspirants. So he has to bring in these things. Or when it's talking about the personal God who creates this world and destroys this world, oh, he's talking about the standpoint of ignorance. The scriptures are talking about a standpoint of ignorance, the vyavaharika sattva. But from the ultimate standpoint, the only truth is non-dual. And so I'm finding again and again, when Shankara interprets these verses, they're not very plausible. Whereas we can interpret the same verses more plausibly and more literally from the standpoint of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. So I'm finding that, even though I'm still a Shankarite, and I still love Shankara. Now, number 2, I'm studying the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna from the Gospel, and I can read Bangla because I'm Bengali, and I went to Bangla school back in Boston. On Sundays, my parents would take me to Bengali school. I'm very grateful now for that. I was bored at the time, and so I learned to read and write Bangla, and then when I lived in Bengal, of course, I improved my Bangla as well. And I'm finding on every page Sri Ramakrishna's teachings are differing from Shankara's. Because whereas Shankara says that the ultimate truth is only Nirguna Brahman, Sri